Hello, welcome to the latest edition of Digital Badge Academy's webcast series. I'm Jim Daniels, your co-host, here along with David Leeser, fellow co-host. And today we have a special guest, very special guest from my point of view, and it's Katie Sievers, who is with AdeptID. Katie, you and I have worked together in the past over at Credly, and then which later became Pearson Workforce Skills. I think you're one of the brightest people I've ever encountered in this whole realm of whether it's digital credentialing or it's skills first transformation strategy, helping people find their next best job and ways to go about doing that, alternative pathways to employment. I mean, you've got such amazing perspectives and points of view around that whole piece, which is why we wanted to bring you on board and spend a little time chatting with you. So thanks for being here today.
It's really a pleasure.
Awesome. So I don't want to get started without at least mentioning a little bit about your background. I know that you earned a Master's of Education from Harvard Graduate School of Education, which is impressive in and of itself. You went on and spent time as a research fellow at Columbia University School of Professional Studies. I believe that's correct.
Did some
And
contract work with them.
yeah, and then of course you ended up at Credly and worked in a number of roles there, everything ranging from customer success to the consulting side of the business, even product management, I believe, later on when it after Pearson had actually acquired Credly. You went on to be a lead in the professional services organization as well. And you also, I think, are still involved as a teaching fellow at Harvard University Graduate School of Education, right?
Yep.
Gosh, where do you find the time to do all this stuff? Oh my gosh. And of course, nowadays you're at AdeptID as a partner experience lead. So that is quite a resume, if I don't say so myself. So why don't we start? I'll start, but just by asking a basic question. So what is it that gets you motivated in the morning um, to come in and focus on this whole aspect of the world of skills first transformation and all these things that surround that? Give us kind of a background of what you get excited about.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. Long-time listener, first-time joiner, big fan of both of you guys. What really gets me up in the morning and my personal drive is expanding opportunities for people. And I think everything that I've done in my career so far has been in service of that. And I've gotten really lucky that the organizations I've worked with have been super aligned to that mission. And it might have looked different in different organizations, but thinking about my kind of journey over the past 5 years or so, when I joined Credly, that's almost exactly the same as the organization's mission statement, making sure that people, have opportunities on the basis of their skills. I found really, really clear alignment there between kind of my skills as someone with a background in education, and I started out in the customer success, part of the business, which was I saw it as the educator's role in technology. And from there, it was just an absolute privilege to work with, hundreds of organizations that were in the business of, validating skills and helping people build skills. So that they could then, take those records and use them to earn their next opportunities. And so I've felt for the past 5 years that I've been doing work that really does drive my personal kind of mission forward. Where I was starting to kind of see opportunity to get even closer to that was some of the digital credentialing work. I'm sure you two feel the same. It's great to see the records kind of coming online, and you see the credentials earned, and you see the impact that has on individuals' identity, their sense of self-efficacy, and what that means they're able to do and take initiative in with their careers. But where the rubber really hits the road is like on the employer side. We need employers to start, looking at these credential records, which we know are valuable in many ways, and use them to make decisions about opportunities that they're handing out to folks. And so the opportunity there that I saw was, get a little closer, get closer to the HR infrastructure, to the, platforms where talent decisions are being made. And that's kind of what led me to AdeptID. And AdeptID works directly with kind of the tech providers, so applicant tracking systems, other talent applications, tools that staffing agencies use, as well as the workforce development organizations, which would have been, clients of Credly's as well. But where we plug in there is directly matching people with opportunities, and finding the best possible alignment between an individual and a job or an internship. So that seems to me to be even closer to that mission. And I really feel like every day, we're seeing the numbers we have a little board at AdeptID that tracks the number of calls being made to our APIs. You can see the volumes of people whose lives were changing. So it's pretty cool to wake up every day and feel like I'm kind of doing what I love.
What's interesting is because when you go back to your mission, there are a lot of different ways you could have gone. There's people, processes, policies, and tools. And it seems like you've landed in the tool area, in the technology. And maybe talk a little bit about, how you see some of these technologies accelerating the things that you believe in and that you want to change.
Yeah, well, I don't think you can detangle any of those three things from one another. And I think, when Jim and I have worked together on the professional services side of the business, and we were focused on the people and the processes and the policies, as well as the technology. And I believe so deeply that like technology is a lever for change, but without the people and the policies around it that are, created in a way that really allow the technology to flourish and be used in the best possible way, it's just a empty kind of, empty tool and toolbox. So I think that the places where I'm seeing the technology accelerate are obviously around AI, which I wasn't going to mention because I feel like AI has just been kind of overused almost. I feel like I'm
Hackneyed
getting
almost
AI
at this point.
fatigue.
Yeah.
But it really is core to how we operate. And where I'm seeing a lot of acceleration is in kind of the transparency and explainability of AI, especially how we're using it. And so, credentials, to kind of take a step back, the credentials that we all have worked with are just data. We're creating data. And that data is as useful as what we do with it. And so the kind of machine learning and AI approach to using that data means we're trying to train models to predict success on the basis of, prior work history, credentials earned, and requirements for a role. And that can be a really opaque process if you don't do it in a transparent way. And so I think where some technologies are accelerating are kind of, risky in the sense that, if you can't explain it, you don't know what's going in, you don't really trust what's coming out of some of these models. But it's also, the acceleration, at least in the space that I've been in, has been toward that really bias conscious, explainable AI approach. And so I've been excited to see how we're leveraging the newest capabilities in generative AI, et cetera, to basically tell the story about why we've kind of surfaced some insights. And we're using the AI to kind of narrate it, but our models, the kind of ways that we're bringing the data in, are so transparent and, tested for bias. And we've done all the work to make sure that we're really confident that we're not doing anyone a disservice with what we're saying about them. And so in my mind, the kind of technology piece is about figuring out where are the right opportunities to use certain tools that we now have available to us, generative AI, et cetera. And where are the risky ways that we shouldn't be using these new technologies because it will kind of add, or amplify bias. So I don't know if that directly answers your question, David, but that's where my mind went when you asked.
Obviously, one thing I think we can all agree on is that from a employer point of view, when you look at the HR stack, or you look at where things stand in terms of embracing new types of credentials, new types of input to help identify someone as being the right fit for a job, qualified in some way. There's obviously been some slow adoption there. Do you think that that is caused more by the lack of solutions or the mistrust of solutions that are there, or just most employers just don't understand yet exactly how they should go about trying to approach that sort of new challenge?
My perspective is that it's really like a change management issue.
Oh,
I think
interesting.
there's a
Yeah.
lot of layers. The ones that I think we've spent a lot of time on, Jim, is frameworks and understanding the difference between credentials and what specific credentials mean, so that we
Right.
can then interpret them more specifically. But I think regardless of how we're understanding credentials or the information even within the credentials, if we're not serving that data up to employers in a way that doesn't require them to change their processes and completely flip the hearts and minds of the people who are making decisions, it's going to be a really hard road to get these adopted and actually used to make human capital decisions. So what I think has been exciting about working with AdeptID now is that it doesn't have an interface. It's an API first tool. We're pumping data directly into the systems that people are already using. We're not asking them to switch kind of practices as much as we're asking them to make their lives easier by using a new tool, to kind of do the same thing that they're doing more efficiently, more effectively, more fairly. And so that's a different approach than asking someone to look at the entire landscape of credentials and come up with an understanding of what exactly this means when someone has a bunch of a wallet full of credentials. What is that actually saying about them? You're asking them to do a lot of work there. What I think is maybe true is that we can do that work for them. We can interpret that, and we can do that because we can interpret credential frameworks and metadata and all of that good stuff. And then we can interpret that, pump out the information that the employers are looking for. And that's, is this person a good fit for the role that I'm trying to fill? Or is this person a good fit for this project? Like, give me a yes and, like, why? And so that's the tip of the iceberg approach that I think is potentially easier for employers. And we've seen that this is, we get really, really good feedback when we talk to folks about, how can we make your existing processes easier, instead of here's this thing you should be doing, and here's this whole, process that you'll now need to implement. And that's not a bad approach either. I think that a lot of organizations are willing to do the work and it pays off hugely.
Well, you're appealing to, as David likes to say, sort of their Monday morning problem is kind of how you're coming at it, which I think is a much more effective way. So that makes a lot of sense.
So you mentioned OCM, and I know that there's a lot of people that are all have a similar mission to you, right? Is that we really do want to change the workforce. We want to empower people. We want to find the people that are left behind and move toward a whole skills first market. And so when you mentioned OCM, it's interesting because everybody's trying to figure out how do we make this happen? Because it's I mean, there's, there were reports that come out from Burning Glass or, different groups that say, well, people are talking about it, but they're actually not doing it. And so what's your thought? I mean, you have a tremendous background from a research perspective as well, on what advice would you give people that are out there, either, from a policy perspective or even just from an organizational perspective, on how to make the change in their company?
Oof, that's a big, big question, David.
No.
The I think the policy answer is complex. I think there's a lot of barriers to even accessing some of the opportunities that are credential worthy. If one challenge is how do we get employers to adopt the credentials, another challenge is how do we get people into the most valuable credentials for them. So from a policy standpoint, I think that part is the on-ramps could be made more frictionless. From an organizational change management perspective, I think it really comes down to just talking to people about what they're trying to do and what they care about, and trying to, get there as seamlessly as possible for them with their buy-in. There's no like shortcut to that. There's no magic wand to wave. You got to talk to people, figure out what they care about.
But I mean, is there like is it a leadership? I mean, I know that
Yeah.
my work when I was at IBM, whenever I wanted to do anything from introducing the IBM badge program to anything else, realized that it was tops down, and it wasn't bottoms up. And I'm
And
just
that's
wondering.
interesting. That's interesting too, because, the people who are making the decisions, like we think about changing hearts and minds, like it's the hiring managers who
Yeah,
are making the call at the end of the day.
yeah.
You can tell people that they need to consider certain information, but or they need to be, issuing credentials that recognize certain things. But if those credentials aren't actually being used to, expand opportunities for people, it's not because they aren't necessarily following the rules. It's because they have some real like beliefs that need to shift. And so that's where like my experience is that if you talk to people and like understand what they're doing today, what they feel isn't working, and then try to get what you're trying to plug in there to address exactly what's not working for them, and work with them, handhold them through the process of really doing the work that needs to happen. It starts to move the needle a little bit at a time. And I mean, you all have way more experience with that than I do at IBM, where, it moved the whole ship eventually. And I'd be curious to hear from your perspectives, like how did you get from moving the needle to moving the ship?
Well, it was, we thought that, providing business value was going to do it. But the reality is, in most cases, it's emotion that drives people. And people use the business value as as the rationale for making the change. But ultimately, I think most people are shifted by emotion. And in the case of IBM, we had introduced a badge program to solve a business problem. I mean, the business problem was we weren't getting enough big data developers to use our big insight product or to, support it. And we set up this great site to train people, and they just were coming up, but they weren't staying around. So that was the first use case, was how do we get more people to get these big data, skills? Badge program was a huge success there. I mean, you know the numbers. I mean, they were just tremendous how it increased the number of people coming up to that site and then sticking around. In fact, Jim did the number multiple times because we thought that, the decimal was in the wrong place. But what ultimately happened was, so we had this movement, and we had more groups coming on board, but it's a big ship to move, like you said. What happened was I was telling the IBM success story on an HR Today web conference, just like we're doing right now. And the senior vice president of HR was sitting in and listening in. And the next morning I got a call from somebody said, "Did you know that she was listening in on your call?" I'm like, "Oh, great. What did I do? I went native or something." I probably said something I wasn't supposed to say, because this is the head of HR, right? And it says, "No, she bought it," because we told emotional stories too. We told people who had been left behind, and they got these badges and they were able to get jobs. And she called a meeting of all the vice presidents under her that morning, literally, and said, "I'm all in. We want to do this across the entire IBM company. And Jim, I think that's really when it really accelerated. We started this bottoms up proof points, but believe it or not, some people were not even sold after we told them 500% increase in this, 200% increase in that. Like, we don't see the value, which was kind of remarkable. But once we got the tops down and we got a senior vice president to say, make it happen, every door opened.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I what I'm hearing is there like the visual communication helps with people feeling like they understand what you're trying to get after. And I think a lot about behavior change in terms of like what's going to motivate someone to take an action. And there's like, yeah, I'm going to nerd out on motivation theory a little bit, but there's a theory, self-determination theory, which says that the core psychological needs are autonomy, competence, and relatedness. Competence, and I feel like I am good at X. Relatedness, I see other people who I care about doing X. And autonomy, I feel like I have agency. And if you don't understand what's going on, you don't really feel any of those things. You're kind of left feeling alone. You don't have that relatedness. You don't feel competent. You feel like you don't understand, so something must be wrong with you. And, autonomy, someone's basically telling you you have to adopt something that you have no clue about. And so that communication piece is so key. And I know when we've done research on what leads to high credential adoption on the earner side, the same is true there. By and large, the most impactful thing you can do is send out a really compelling email telling people or message somewhere where you're going to reach them that they're about to receive this thing, which tells them they're good at something. There are others like them who also have this achievement. And they did this and it was their achievement. They have that agency over now what they're going to do and how they're going to tell their story. And so I think all of those things are how we can kind of leverage the science of like how we can change behaviors. But it comes down to like, people's beliefs about themselves, their, sense of accomplishment. And I think that comes from both the leaders who are saying, hey, we're going to do this thing. It's going to rock. And I'm going to get to take credit for that. Awesome. And the earners who are saying, I have this proof now that I'm good at something and I'm excited to tell this story.
Well, I think you do a really great job with the story at the AdeptID too, because I would think that selling middleware is hard because middleware doesn't really have an interface, like you said, right? So it's hard to have a visual on that. But I think what you've done with that is simplify the story to the point where I'm going to grease the skids. I'm going to make things easier for you. I'm going to serve up the information you need to make your life better. And I think that is, that's something everybody wants. Everybody wants ease and they want simplicity in their lives. And I think when we think about this whole this skills first movement, there are a lot of different moving parts and a lot of different agendas behind it. And the question is, where do you start? Is it with skills-based hiring? Is it skills-based training? Is it, how do you move into something like that? And I don't know what the answer is, and I don't know if you even have an idea on the answer on that. But it sounds like, from your vantage point, that technology you're using is moving people in that direction.
Yeah, and I think there, are so many amazing toolkits, playbooks, including your own, around how to basically make that skills first transformation, or at least take first steps. And yeah, again, I think in my mind, the practice, like what we're doing every day, is a part of it. The tools that we're using and the data we're ingesting is another part of it. And so if our tools are screening people out because they don't have keyword matches, even though the substance is strong, that's not a skills first aligned practice. Right. So even if they're, creating, skills rich job descriptions and, credential issuing themselves, if you're still doing that first thing of like screening people out because they don't have exact keyword matches, like it's things like that, which then mean you aren't having a transformational effect. You're doing the easy stuff on top. And so I think that's on one hand kind of like easier to solve because you know there are tools for this, like AdeptID. Like just plug us in and we'll help you make the most of the skills information in people's like applications and profiles. But on the other hand, it's really hard because it's often invisible and you don't know, you know, where those things are happening across the organization. And so yeah, I mean it's a billion-dollar question probably.
When I think about identifying talent, matching people to the work to be done, and making sure that's as fulfilling to the individual that's going to end up doing the work as it is to the company that needs the work done. Do you think there's other kinds of innovations out there that are complementary to like the things you're focused on today at AdeptID? And what I'm thinking of is in the realm of like assessments, right?
Mm.
Some of the newer kinds of assessments that are out there to kind of help people understand what their potential is and what they in all likelihood would be more successful doing, you know, as a career choice and things like that. Do you see a complementary kind of play between like what AdeptID is doing and things like that?
Totally, totally. Yeah. And I'll be the first to say I was like a huge assessment skeptic before I joined, really before we joined Pearson. And then I met a bunch of industrial organizational psychologists. I took a course. So I was like, I must be missing something here. There's a lot of really smart people working on this stuff and they're all great and have good intentions. So clearly like I'm missing something. And I was. And I think the clincher for me with assessments is that they can be used for good and they can be used for evil. And I think
Right.
where they're used for good is where they expose information about you that you can use in a more empowered way. I think the, you know, My Inner Genius stuff that you guys are involved with is, you know, case in point. It's used to help almost hold a magic mirror up to someone. This
Yeah.
is what you'd be great at. This is what you can like, you know, carry into your next role. It can be used to kind of expand the horizons rather than like, you know, narrow in. And so I think where I've seen assessments used in relationship with what I'm talking about with AdeptID is oftentimes the partners that we work with, specifically on the kind of workforce training and development side, will use assessments similar to My Inner Genius to kind of point people toward paths that they are most aligned with. They'll use, you know, assessments, you know, skill assessments as an input into our models. And I think where those are created and implemented in a way that is very robust and fair, those can be really really powerful inputs. The danger zone there is, you know, if assessments are not created in a fair and valid and reliable way, then the inputs are going to be unfair, invalid, unreliable. So, you know, working with folks who are experts in assessments is like my number one lookout. But yeah, I think that they're useful input. They're useful in exposing opportunities for people that they might not have seen as an option for them. Um, yeah, I'm curious your thoughts on that too. Where are you seeing the most impact with assessments?
Well, you know, it's interesting. Well, I think that, well, I think you have to back up from there, right? I think and I think, you know, where you fit in is really a phenomenal place because I think what you have to start out with, and this is where people are missing the mark, I think, is what are the jobs to be done and make sure that we have a clear understanding of what the skills are that are needed and what the actual tasks are in the jobs. I mean, we look at these job descriptions and they're just a mess. I mean, they basically say, you know, you need 35 years of experience with, you know, Salesforce. Well, you know, Salesforce hasn't been around that long or whatever, you know, you need 10 years of social media. You don't really need that. So I think that if we started with what the job is to be done, and then we map that to, okay, based on that, let's have a common language around all these capabilities and these skills and everything that we need to get the job done, which is the framework. Then I think then you then say, let's take inventory. And let's take inventory by doing, like you said, an assessment that is trusted, that is non-biased and everything else, and assess these capabilities. Because I think really too often we're looking at what a person did rather than what they can do. And we look at these performance reviews and they're just so flawed and so biased. I mean, I know a guy that we modeled after in one company. We said, he's the top salesperson in the whole organization. And we want more people like him. So let's go interview him and talk to him, and let's capture everything about him, and let's make a profile, a persona around him. Well, it turns out what he was doing was he was working with one business partner in this company and feeding leads to this one business partner. The leads were purchased from the call center. He would pay them off to get the shiniest, best leads. And they would give them trips to Hawaii, give them big screen TVs and all this other stuff. And then he would pass the leads off to this business partner who was the top business partner. And the business partner was giving them trips to Hawaii and doing all this other stuff. So that's not a very good way to do business, right? But the same thing happens on a micro level with performance reviews. The manager gave them a good account, or they liked them, and they said, hey, this person was good at something in the past. And I think as the labor market changes, you have to say, what are the jobs to be done? Let's make sure we have a taxonomy around that, or some sort of framework. Let's find out what a person can do, right? Then you fit in, I think, perfectly there with AdeptID. It said, let's mine all that data and serve it up to you to match them to the jobs to be done, what the roles are in the organization and what the specific tasks are. I think badges fit in nicely because you take all that metadata from all these different assessments and all these other different data sources, and if you put them into badges, now you have everything in a consistent, consumable, standardized way. That you build a skills cloud that's pretty easy to mine that data, and it's not going to have much error in it.
Yeah.
That was my thought on it.
Yeah, and you helped me realize that I fell into my own trap here. When I think about assessments too, one thing that I often advise clients around is assessments are not just tests. And I spoke about them just in terms of kind of psychometric assessments, but assessments are any way of validating someone's abilities.
Yeah.
And so, observation is one of them.
Mhm.
Hopefully you have some sort of rubric to go off of
Yeah.
that's kind of consistent. Demonstration in a lab environment or, whatever else is another type of assessment. There's so many, I think expanding our understanding of assessments helps us create credentials that are easier to implement. You don't have to create necessarily a test for every credential. And it also means that we're empowering people to demonstrate their abilities in multiple ways. I really appreciate that point around having a common language, making sure that whatever way people are demonstrating their abilities, it's translated into a common way of talking about skills and a common framework so that we can, compare apples to apples and not apples to oranges to, zucchini. And so there's a lot of different ways that I've seen people kind of handle, for example, performance reviews as a moment where skill validation happens. There's a new organization called Marify that is rethinking how performance kind of management works, and it's much more agile and skills based. So there's a lot of really cool stuff going on to basically help us capture the skill information that is all around us all the time.
Yeah. Yeah. Think about that. How much skill really is learned, through some sort of educational program versus on the job, and which is more valuable? Probably both are valuable, right? So,
Yeah,
but
and you think
we discount
about
it.
like the 70-20-10 model, 70% of what we learn is on the job, 20% is social, 10% is formal. And
Yeah.
typically what we're credentialing is that 10% to formal learning. We're
Right.
missing
That's right.
90%
Right.
of the
Exactly.
picture.
Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
That's a really, really
Yeah.
good point. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the experiential piece that is a huge, huge part that is being overlooked today, So I'm hoping tons and tons and tons of employers get to watch this, right? And hear everything that's been discussed on this call, because I think it's just hugely valuable. If you were to be speaking with somebody who's considering this whole, how do we move into a new way of thinking about how we match talent to the work to be done and really embrace the concept of skills first transformation, what kind of advice would you give an employer as a place to start? How should, what's the best way to get started, kind of heading down that pathway?
I think a place to start would be taking inventory around where in your business you have the biggest need. Like you were saying, David, like there's going to be pockets where it's really impactful to implement something quickly. And having a quick win right out of the gate is really motivating. And so look for areas of opportunity and start there. Is there a role that's really hard to fill, or you have high churn, or you see growth coming down the pipeline because of maybe technology changes? Pick your starting point wisely, and then use a, human-centered design approach to really understand what's going to work for the people that you're working with in that kind of, I would call it like a pilot area. Really talk to people, understand what their goals are, understand what they're doing now, where you can plug into the processes they're already using. And I think that's oftentimes like the most fun part of the process, is getting to really deeply understand how people are feeling about the work that they're doing and where we can help. And so as a starting point, I guess, pick a starting point wisely and talk to the people there about how change can be best implemented with them.
So Katie, where can people get together with you, or how can they connect with you to find out more about the work you do, what AdeptID and really what your mission is?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the best way to reach me. Adept-ID.com is where they can find more information about AdeptID. But I'm always happy to get notes on LinkedIn, continue the conversation.
Thank you so much, Katie. I'm always just fascinated when I sit down and have a conversation with you. I think you're one of the brightest minds I've come across, and I really appreciate you being with us today.
Thanks, Jim, and thanks, David.
Thank
This
you.
is really fun.
Are you looking to launch a digital badging program or improve an existing one? Look no further than Digital Badge Academy. Our highly popular online masterclass will help you gain the skills and insights necessary to achieve success. Enroll now and start learning today.